this is an important region for Korean history. So much happens on the
Yalu River. 안녕하세요. This is Mark Peterson with the Frog outside the Research Center, and today my old friend Joseph Seeley is back in town. He's a professor at the University of Virginia, undergraduate at BYU, great undergraduate, did his PhD at Stanford, and now teaching at the University of Virginia. And last time we talked a little bit about tigers, your undergraduate thesis, but today let's talk about some of your recent research. You're preparing a book?
Yes, that's right. Well, first off, thanks again for having me.
Gyosunim.
I owe so much to Dr. Peterson Gyosunim
thank you.
for being able to study Korea professionally. It's really awesome. So,
well, we've got a good core of students that are out there, and little by little, we're trying to make a difference. You're working on the Yalu River.
That's right.
You know, I always talk about the Yalu River. You may not agree with this 100%, but I like to point out that I've got a list of 10 indicators of Korean peaceful and stable government. And one of them is the fact that the Yalu River, I argue, and I get it from David Kong in USC, a political scientist, and he argues that that's a symbol of stability because it's the longest unchanged country border in the world, is his argument. And there is some question about the Manchus moving, and there is some question about the lower Yalu being 1,000 years, but not the upper Yalu. That was sort of indistinct. That's sort of open territory. But we say that. Do you accept that, or is that a problem for you?
I think the principle there is remarkable. The idea that compared to, say, Europe, where national borders are constantly changing and aren't even really being settled until the 1900s, the fact that this river, some or part of the river has been a border between Korea and China for about 1,000 years.
Or Korea and Proto-China.
Yes, sort of these early...
The Manchus, the Khitans,
these different kingdoms and what's now China. That's a good point.
I used to say China all the time, and I realized that...
No.
Sort of,
there's a lot going on there, right? Yeah. What's now Northeast China. Yes.
Well, a lot going on there, and yet not going on in Korea, which is
That's true.
one of the contrasts there.
Yeah. When I talk to my students when I teach pre-modern Korea, it's like, by the time we get to Goryeo, you only have to remember 2 dynasties, just Goryeo, Joseon, and you cover 1,000 years of history.
Yeah.
It's great. But no, I became really interested in this border between Northern Korea and China because
it's a fascinating subject.
So many different peoples, cultures coming together. And I think the thing about borders, when we look at the edges of something, I feel like we actually learn a lot about the whole as well.
Yeah.
We can learn a lot about Korea from, its sort of edge there, and how Koreans are interacting with Chinese and others.
You learn about X a lot from learning the non-X.
Right. And this border encounter, and this encounter with other peoples.
Yeah.
And you see these old records of people crossing the Yalu, these old, like during the Joseon dynasty, when people go on tribute missions to China, right? And they would always remark on it, when they crossed the river, just how different it felt. But the period I'm primarily researching is the history of the Yalu River during the early 20th century. So this is the 일제강점기, the period of Japanese occupation and colonization.
And that's a time too where the border's the border, but there are a lot of non-border people on the other side of the border. You've got a lot of Chosunjin living on the northern side of the river.
There's a lot of movement across this border, and a lot of Koreans going into Manchuria because it's hard to live in Korea, right? They're trying to find land. Or sometimes for political reasons, they want to fight against the Japanese, and so they're going into Manchuria.
The armed anti-Japanese movement, the guerrilla movement, ended up in Manchuria, on the other side of the Yalu.
Very active along that border.
Did the Japanese try to maintain that border?
Absolutely. So they wanted
the guerrillas saw that as an attack point.
Yes. So they have
interesting.
The Japanese have a lot of these border police stations all across the Yalu, trying to control who and what can cross.
Yeah.
But then you have these independence fighters or guerrilla fighters coming across the river to try to attack in Korea.
Which is one of the reasons that the Japanese used for justification to go into Manchuria.
Exactly. Well, in order to protect Korea, we have to control Manchuria, and it just keeps going. But one thing I'm really interested in my research is how this river border, like we mentioned, there's a lot of people going back and forth. It changes through the seasons. And see, and historians, we like to talk about years and decades and centuries, but I'm trying to get us to talk a little more about what happens between spring, summer, fall, winter. Too. And in the winter, for example, this river it's so cold in northern Korea, it freezes over.
Oh, yeah, and that's how people
Yeah.
escape today.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So the frozen Yalu and Tumen rivers, are a lot of North Korean defectors leave North Korea that way.
In fact, when the Manchus invaded in 1624 and 1636,
So 1627 and 1636.
what did I say, 1624, 1627, Cheongmyo and
Jongmyo and
Byungja.
Byungja, yeah.
So, did that happen in wintertime?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So you have all these different invaders from the north crossing that icy river. And you know, we see this in Korean history at multiple points. In the 1920s and 30s, you also have a lot of anti-Japanese guerrillas using that icy river to go.
That's the time to attack.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then during the Korean War, a lot of Chinese soldiers coming.
Oh,
across.
of course, they came.
Yeah,
The
that's
initial invasion was
Yes,
in December.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a border, but in the winter it's a permeable border.
Yes. Even more permeable. Yes.
Oh, even more permeable.
Yeah, because you can cross it by boat
Yeah,
during the sort of warmer months.
yeah.
But certainly a lot easier to cross just on
Just walk
foot.
across.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Japanese period of Japanese occupation, lots of Koreans who are poor, impoverished, you know, don't have much else to do to survive, turn to smuggling.
Yeah.
So they're smuggling things like salt,
Oh.
because salt was an official government monopoly.
Yeah.
So to get around that, you smuggle salt, cloth, opium. There's quite a bit of opium
Oh.
trafficking along the border. People would grow opium too.
What else is there to say about it? About that border?
Well, one thing I want to say, earlier we were talking about the border as like the stable thing, but I
Yeah.
do want to point out that it changes as it floods, and you know, the rivers are these dynamic things. They're not just like these static lines on a map.
Yeah.
And so one thing I study is how you have these river islands that form in the lower river.
Oh, yeah.
And then it becomes a question of, well, who controls the island in the middle of the
Oh,
border? Is
yeah.
it the Chinese side? Is it the Korean side?
Okay, well, you're looking at the 20th century, but what
Yeah.
about Wiwado? Is Wiwado a permanent island or is it a sandbar that moves? It's
yes.
permanent?
It was permanent.
It's got rock.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, that's famous because, right, that's where Lee Sung-gae
That's where
goes.
I'm
I'm not
gonna
attack the main. Yeah.
I'm not gonna do this. It's
Yeah.
crazy. I'm
So
going home.
this is an important region for Korean history. So
Yeah.
much happens on
On
the
the
banks
Yalu
of the
River. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Symbolic.
Yes. Yes.
I argue of the stability and the longevity
Yes.
of Korean history. Oh,
Yes,
that's really great.
important, Yeah.
Well, really interesting. Thanks for
Yeah.
coming in to
Oh, thank
visit.
you.
You happen to be
Yeah.
in town in
Yeah.
Utah. Great to see you.
All right.
I'll try to get out to Virginia sometime and
Sounds
see your
good.
things out there.
환영합니다.
환영합니다. Okay, 감사합니다. Okay, we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.